10月7日，知名博主 Lex Friedman 与 Cursor 团队进行了一次访谈，讨论了 AI 对于编程行业的影响以及 Cursor 未来的发展。在这次访谈中， Cursor 团队回答了 AI 将来是否会代替程序员的问题，以及 AI 将如何改变编程的方式，同时也提到了程序员与 AI 协作的潜力、编程技能的变化，以及 AI 在提高编程速度和效率上的作用等等一系列大家关心的问题。我已经将这一次的访谈内容总结成了12组问答，方便你能快速地获取核心内容。如果你对这些内容感兴趣的话，可以来我的知识星球免费获取。接下来我们来看一下这一次的访谈视频。
Big question looking out into the future. You're now at the center of the programming world. How do you think programming, the nature of programming, changes in the next few months, in the next year, in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years, 10 years?
I think we're really excited about a future where the programmer's in the driver's seat for a long time. And you've heard us talk about this a little bit, but one that emphasizes speed and agency for the programmer and control, the ability to modify anything you want to modify, the ability to iterate really fast on what you're building. And this is a little different, I think, than where some people are jumping to in the space, where I think one idea that's captivated people is, can you talk to your computer? Can you have it build software for you as if you're talking to like an engineering department or an engineer over Slack? And can it just be this sort of isolated text box? And part of the reason we're not excited about that is, some of the stuff we've talked about with latency. But then a big piece, a reason we're not excited about that is because that comes with giving up a lot of control. It's much harder to be really specific when you're talking in the text box. And if you're necessarily just going to communicate with a thing like you would be communicating with an engineering department, you're actually abdicating tons of really important decisions to this bot. And this kind of gets at fundamentally what engineering is. I think that some people who are a little bit more removed from engineering might think of it as, the spec is completely written out, and then the engineers just come and they just implement. And it's just about making the thing happen in code and making the thing exist. But I think a lot of the best engineering, the engineering we enjoy, involves tons of tiny micro decisions about what exactly you're building and about really hard trade-offs between, speed and cost and just all the other things involved in a system. And we want, as long as humans are actually the ones making, designing the software and the ones specifying what they want to be built, and it's not just like company run by all AIs, we think you'll really want the human in a driver's seat dictating these decisions. And so the jury's still out on kind of what that looks like. I think that, one weird idea for what that could look like is it could look like you can control the level of abstraction you view a code base at. And you can point at specific parts of a code base that maybe you digest a code base by looking at it in the form of pseudocode. And you can actually edit that pseudocode too, and then have changes get made down at the sort of formal programming level. And you keep you can gesture at any piece of logic in your software component of programming. You keep the inflow text editing component of programming. You keep the control of, you can even go down into the code. You can go at higher levels of abstraction while also giving you these big productivity gains.
It'd be nice if you can go up and down the abstraction stack.
Yeah. And there are a lot of details to figure out there. That's sort of like a fuzzy idea. Time will tell if it actually works. But these principles of control and speed and the human in the driver's seat, we think are really important. We think for some things, like Arvid mentioned before, for some styles of programming, you can kind of hand it off chatbot style, if you have a bug that's really well specified. But that's not most of programming. And that's also not most of the programming we think a lot of people value.
What about like the fundamental skill of programming? There's a lot of people, like young people right now, kind of scared, like thinking, because they like love programming, but they're scared about like, will I be able to have a future if I pursue this career path? Do you think the very skill of programming will change fundamentally?
I actually think this is a really, really exciting time to be building software. Yeah. Like, we remember what programming was like in 2013, 2012, whatever it was. And there was just so much more cruft and boilerplate and looking up something really gnarly. And that stuff still exists. It's definitely not at zero. But programming today is way more fun than back then. It's like we're really getting down to the delight, concentration, and all the things that really draw people to programming. Like, for instance, this element of being able to build things really fast and speed, and also individual control. Like, all those are just being turned up a ton. And so I think it's going to be a really, really fun time for people who build software. I think that the skills will probably change too. I think that people's taste and creative ideas will be magnified, and it will be a little bit about boilerplate text editing, maybe even a little bit less about carefulness, which I think is really important today. If you're a programmer, I think it'll be a lot more fun.
What do you guys think?
I agree. I'm very excited to be able to change, like, just one thing that happened recently was, like, we wanted to do a relatively big migration to our code base. We were using async local storage in Node.js, which is known to be not very performant, and we wanted to migrate to a context object. And this is a big migration and affects the entire code base. And Swal and I spent, 5 days working through this, even with today's AI tools. And I am really excited for a future where I can just show a couple of examples, and then the AI applies that to all of the locations, and then it highlights, oh, this is a new example, like, what should I do? And then I show exactly what to do there. And then that can be done in like 10 minutes. And then you can iterate much, much faster. Then you don't have to think as much up front and stand at the blackboard and like think exactly like, how are we going to do this? Because the cost is so high. But you can just try something first and you realize, oh, this is not actually exactly what I want. And then you can change it instantly again after. And so, yeah, I think being a programmer in the future is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I really like that point about, it feels like a lot of the time with programming, there are two ways you can go about it. One is like, you think really hard, carefully upfront about the best possible way to do it, and then you spend your limited time of engineering to actually implement it. But I much prefer just getting in the code and like, taking a crack at it, seeing how it kind of lays out, and then iterating really quickly on that. That feels more fun.
Yeah, like just speaking to generating the boilerplate is great. So you just focus on the nuanced, difficult design decisions. The migration, I feel like this is a cool one. Like, it seems like large language models are able to basically translate from one programming language to another, or like translate, like migrate in the general sense of what migrate is. But that's in the current moment. So, I mean, the fear has to do with like, okay, as these models get better and better, then you're doing less and less creative decisions. And is it going to kind of move to a place where it's, you're operating in the design space of natural language, where natural language is the main programming language? And I guess I could ask that by way of advice. Like, if somebody's interested in programming now, what do you think they should learn? Like, do they, you guys started in some Java and, I forget some PHP.
Objective-C.
Objective-C, there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, we all know JavaScript is going to win. And not TypeScript. It's going to be like vanilla JavaScript. It's just going to eat the world. And maybe a little bit PHP. And I mean, it also brings up the question of like, I think Don Knuth has this idea that some percent of the population is geeks. And like, there's a particular kind of psychology and mind required for programming. And it feels like more and more that expands. The kind of person that should be able to, can do great programming might expand.
I think different people do programming for different reasons, but I think the true, maybe like the best programmers are the ones that really love, just like absolutely love programming. For example, there are folks in our team who literally, when they get back from work, they go and then they boot up Cursor and then they start coding on their side projects for the entire night, and they stay out till 3 a.m. doing that. And when they're sad, they've said, I just really need to code. And I think like, there's that level of programmer where like this obsession and love of programming, I think makes really the best programmers. And I think these types of people will really get into the details of how things work.
I guess the question I'm asking, that exact program, let's think about that person. When the super tab, the super awesome, praise be the tab, succeeds, and you keep pressing tab.
That person in the team loves Cursor tab more than anybody else, right?
Yeah, and it's also not just like pressing tab is like just pressing tab. That's like the easy way to say it and the catchphrase, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're actually doing when you're pressing tab is that you're injecting intent all the time while you're doing it. You're sometimes you're rejecting it, sometimes you're typing a few more characters, and that's the way that you're sort of shaping the things that's being created. And I think programming will change a lot to just what is it that you want to make.
It's sort of higher bandwidth. The communication to the computer just becomes higher and higher bandwidth, as opposed to like just typing is much lower bandwidth than communicating intent.
I mean, this goes to your manifesto titled Engineering Genius. We are an applied research lab building extraordinary productive human AI systems. So speaking to this like hybrid element. To start, we're building the engineer of the future, a human AI programmer that's an order of magnitude more effective than any one engineer. This hybrid engineer will have effortless control over their code base and no low entropy keystrokes. They will iterate at the speed of their judgment, even in the most complex systems. Using a combination of AI and human ingenuity, they will outsmart and out-engineer the best pure AI systems. We are a group of researchers and engineers. We build software and models to invent at the edge of what's useful and what's possible. Our work has already improved the lives of hundreds of thousands of programmers. And on the way to that, we'll at least make programming more fun. So thank you for talking today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.